Okay. Okay. Cool. All right. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Mike. All right. Am I audible now? No. Not audible now. No. You can't hear me. अभी audible नहीं है. Can you hear? All right. All right. All right. All right. I think I've met some people. I haven't met everyone. My name is Moshumi Mohanty. I work with the Electric Mobility Program at the Center for Science and Environment. Yeah. So, I'm going to do a really quick wrap up of our work and get this started because there's a panel discussion that follows after this. And so yeah, so there's a buzz around electric vehicles, right? I don't want to get into why we need electric vehicles because I think energy security, pollution, contribution to emission spectrum has already been talked about in the sessions we've had before this. So I'll just deep dive into what's happening now. So I think this is a CSE graph of what is the current status of electric vehicles in India. This number that you see is for March 2021, and the number you see here is for calendar year end 2021. So clearly there's been a huge move there. What is interesting about it is that 95% of this number here, 311, which is 3,11,000, is 2- and 3-wheelers. So that's where basically the story begins. And this is a projection which was done at CSE, and going by our study, we believe that the electric vehicle sector needs to grow annually every year at 46% to reach where the government would like it to reach by 2030, 30%. I think I'll come back to this later. So all this basically is like, what are we trying to solve for? We're trying to solve for emission. We're trying to solve for policy that support that can make it happen. We're trying to solve for ecosystem, the batteries ecosystem, the charging ecosystem, the financial frameworks. So I think I might be running through a few of these slides because of time constraints. And so we have these targets that were given out by several members of the government of 30 at 30 and then 70%, but then 70% of commercial cars and whatever, 2- to 3-wheelers at 80%. But there has not been any regulatory mandate that has backed these numbers, and there has never been a long-term policy roadmap. And so to get there, to have any kind of meaningful change, I think these are factors that are very important and need to be there. So we've had some targets earlier in the day in 2013, which talked about 60 to 70 lakh electric vehicles, but we've reached 6.3 lakhs last year. End of December, this number was 9.4 lakhs, if I remember right, and there were 15 lakh e-rickshaws. So we're doing a lot of e-rickshaws. And we do, so the policy support picture clearly is very, very electric two-wheeler and three-wheeler focused. And you can see the startup funding that went up in this in this time frame. It was a little after we had FAME 2 revision, which clearly shows why investors got so excited about it. However, what's happening is that the charging infrastructure and four-wheelers, these are two areas that are, I think, fourth and fifth in the pecking order, which is clearly not getting enough attention. And there have been on the supply side, this is all the demand side that I talked about. On the supply side, production linked incentives have promised 42,500 crores for batteries and other component manufacturing. But there are challenges with qualification. Availing these incentives is one of the things that, one of the elements I'm hoping we will get more information when we hear our industry participants. These are numbers I just spoke about, two and three wheelers. Look at the numbers that are jumping here. The first one is a 70% jump. The second one is 4.5 times. Two-wheeler figures that I show here, there is a 4.5 time jump. This I've already talked about. So, and Uttar Pradesh, by the way, had the highest numbers last year, 67,000. So what is happening here? Clearly, there is policy, there is demand creation policy behind these numbers. This is the specific, this is very specific to Delhi, this particular slide. Again, analysis done by CSC. The central subsidy and the Delhi government subsidy effectively flattens two-wheeler upfront price by an average of 57%. That's almost 60%. So no, clearly that's one of the main reasons that we are selling so many two-wheelers. I don't have slides for other segments, though, because we don't have too much time, but buses, yes. We know that actually here we are trying to solve not only for buses, actually we're trying to solve for mobility, we're trying to solve for air pollution gains, we're trying to solve for clean accessibility. And but there are a lot of gaps that we already know about, right? They very high upfront price, they cost about 3 to 4 times more than a regular ICE bus. Their total cost of ownership is in the range of, I think, 63 rupees a kilometer or some such thing, compared to 44 for a low-cost diesel bus. So we're looking at massive gaps in TCO. And there are gaps that I think we need to solve for. For instance, this year in the union budget, it was announced that we're going to have 20,000 funding for 20,000 buses, but they were not linked to electrification. So I think somewhere we need to have a more holistic way of looking at mobility and addressing it and solving for concerns that actually affects all of us. So there have been issues with ordering and procurement, which at the moment is with CESL, as we know. Yeah, I think buses, we'll have Sarwan Singh from Ashok Leyland, who's going to tell us more about it. Other areas that we need to solve for: batteries, of course, access to battery metals, recycling of existing batteries, and feeding those recycled metals back into the manufacturing system, so that the input costs become lower. So we are constantly talking about cost of technology, right, when it comes to electric vehicles. And cost of technology, batteries, last I checked, was $132 per kilowatt hour. But I think it needs to go down further. some of that India could win by actually getting into the recycling picture in a large way, big way. Then we need to solve for setting up, the ecosystem, the infrastructure, charging stations. But earlier in the day, Aditya talked about discoms and their debt profiles. Discoms are a very large, play a very large role in the charging station framework. And, but we don't have any support for them. We're not supporting, they're not there in any of the FAME and PLI incentives that have been announced, which I think is an area that needs to be looked at. And these are actually my last 2 points. We at CSC have done a massive study where we have we've actually studied other electric vehicle markets to look at what are the areas that have made things happen in these in places like Norway, Germany, France, US, Japan, other Asian markets. So, so 2 of the main points that we came across was fuel economy standards, really stringent fuel economy standards. We're sitting at 113 grams CO2 per kilometer. This, I'm talking about 95 grams CO2 per kilometer. There's a gap, which I think we could address. And a zero emission vehicle mandate. It works with the credit system. I could talk about it offline if anyone wants to know. But essentially, the zero emission vehicle mandate is this. It makes it mandatory for vehicle manufacturers to sell a certain number of ZEV vehicles. And you can do that with a fuel efficiency mandate. If the entire portfolio of a manufacturer has to meet a certain number, they cannot do it without electrification. That is what is happening. Why is Volkswagen producing the number of electric vehicles that it is producing? Because they have to sell in Germany. Because if they want to sell in California, they need to meet those numbers. So these are areas that we could certainly look at. And yeah, I've already talked about charging infrastructure and batteries. I think our states are, I think, a very important actor in this whole game of electric vehicles. I'm running out of time. All right. So we have 21 states which have either notified or drafted EV policies, and Delhi actually has had great gains from 1.6% to 9% last year. If you look at the EV policies, we've been studying the EV policies in the states. Yeah, I'm done. This is my last slide. We've been studying the EV policies, and they are kind of differential policies because depending on strengths of each state, and some of them root for manufacturing, some of them root for markets. But I think what they are not also looking at is preferential policies for electric vehicles. Parking, road access, permits, these are pain points. If these were addressed, we could see some gains there. But no state has provided a ZEV mandate till now, which makes it mandatory for electric vehicles certain number of electric vehicles to be sold by a manufacturer. So globally, this is my last slide, so I'm done. Look at the numbers here. Norway is somewhere at 75% of market share. And actually, China also is a big one. Their absolute numbers are very high, but since their ICE vehicle numbers are also high, the market share is not too huge. But look at Iceland, look at Netherlands. Yeah. So look at the gaps. Look at those gaps. Most of this has happened because of a few. I didn't understand the graph. Okay. This is. Can we discuss it later because we're running out of time? It's by year. Now it makes sense? Yeah? No, I can explain this later. Can we just get started?
Yeah, we are so sorry.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'll explain. Yeah, 80%, 70%. Yeah. Get that? Yeah, its percentages are here. Countries are there. Yeah. All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks a lot, Bhushumi. It's like we are literally, under the timer is on us.
Zero emission vehicles.
Right. If you can just shut this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Bhushumi. Because I see all our panelists have joined already, and Mr. Munjal has a time. I mean, he really has to go, so that's why we are really rushing. And Bhushumi just couldn't get the space that she needed to explain everything to you, but we will certainly take that up after the discussion. So this is really a very exciting time of this afternoon, and we already have a great panel. And let me first introduce you to the panel. And I, Anumita Roy Chaudhary from Center for Science and Environment. So I'm meeting all of you for the first time, actually. So great to have all of you here. So let me introduce you to Mr. Naveen Munjal, and certainly he needs no introduction, Managing Director, Hero Electrical Vehicles, and a very passionate champion of electric two-wheelers. And so from him, we are going to hear about that specific segment, which is absolutely central to the e-transition that we are looking forward to. We have with us Mr. Sarvan Singh, CEO, and OHM Global Mobility, which is actually providing support to Ashok Leyland. And it's about providing mobility service. And therefore, he is going to tell us about the bus segment. And then we have another very interesting area for discussion. And for that, we have Ms. Smriti Sharma. She is head of public policy, Amazon. And as you know, that retail and e-retail, which is now exploding, and especially after the pandemic. And that has another huge implication for mobility in India. So that's the exciting session that we're looking forward to. So I will, without wasting any more time, Mr. Munjal, we begin with you. And to set the rules of the conversation, we want to keep this very interactive. So it's not a long narrative, but I will ask you a question, your response. But what is more important for us, for your interaction, as you can see, I hope all of you can see the hall here and the people, the audience here. And we have about 67 journalists from around the country. Okay, and from all the prominent media houses and print and audiovisual. So it's a great group here, very knowledgeable. And so we would like a lot more interaction between you and them. So to begin this conversation, I just want to say that after the COP26 in Glasgow this time, there was a huge excitement when India signed on to the declaration for 100% zero emission in the time horizon of 2030 to 40. It's as immediate as that. And very interesting, India, while signing that document, put a caveat. There was a rider saying that two-wheelers and three-wheelers need to be the key focus of that declaration, and that 70 to 80% electrification in that segment is possible. Now, clearly, we are looking at two-wheelers as the low-hanging fruit in this e-transition. And we certainly believe that it is doable because it is something where we are going to see the price parity much sooner. In fact, with FAME incentive, we are already seeing that. And we feel that maybe the critical mass in the market will be possible much sooner, that it may even not require incentive after a few years. That is the kind of potential that we are looking at. But yet, we are not seeing that transformation right now. Moushami showed that graph, and we know that even today, even though we are talking about a target of 30%, 70% that is possible, but as of today, we are talking about less than 2% electrification in the market. So how are we going to see that transformation? And already, or in addition to the policies that we already have, what is going to be the industry strategy? And two-wheeler segment is a very volatile segment where it's just not the traditional OEM so much, but we are beginning to see explosion of new players, startups in that segment, and who are bringing in new models. Now, is this therefore time for us, in addition to giving incentive, to set a zero emission target, where you give production mandate to the OEMs for annual transformation of the market? So that's the question that we have for you, Mr. Munjal.
Good afternoon, Ms. Chaudhary. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure. So the speaker before me, that I was watching the presentation, she already covered a large part of what I was going to talk about in terms of the two-wheeler conversion, etc. And Ms. Chaudhary, you've covered a large part of it as well, talking about the policies, etc. So I'm just going to give you a very brief, broad outline of where we stand. So when we look at electromobility, you've got to look at it in different baskets. You've got to divide it up into different baskets. You've got the two-wheeler, you've got the three-wheelers, you've got public transport, commercial vehicles, and cars. All of them are going to take off at some point of time. But the low-hanging fruit, as Ms. Chaudhary also said, it's going to be actually the two-wheelers. Now, for various reasons. One, majority of the vehicles on the road are two-wheelers in India. Second, there is a lot of price parity which is there in the two-wheeler segment now because of the subsidies that have come into play. So we've gone in terms of subsidies from earlier what was announced as the NEMMP policy in 2013 on to FAME 1 in 2015 and then FAME 2 in 2019, which got enhanced to a much better policy last year, as of June of last year. So clearly from the government standpoint, there is clear intent of conversion towards electric. That is clear, that is apparently clear. And even before that, there was a MNRE policy which was there from 2008-9 onwards. So for the past 12, 13 years, the government's been trying to push the mobility sector to start converting towards electric. Now, there are various reasons for it. One, of course, is oil dependency, moving away from oil dependency. The second, of course, is the environment and our signing off on net zero by our Prime Minister at the COP26 of 2070 as being the target date. When you start working backwards from there, and you start working and looking at power conversion, you're going to look at emissions conversion and how we get there. Two-wheelers and three-wheelers in the last mile transport, we've actually got to start acting on them now. So from a central standpoint, we have a strong policy, which is the FAME policy, FAME 2, which, as I said, got enhanced last year. While that's the case, what we believe as of policies are not necessarily that they should continue in perpetuity, because no business should be built on policies and on subsidies. So what we've asked for and what we've been talking to the government is a milestone-based policies. So you support it up to a certain extent and then have them taper down and then you go that way. Different countries have adopted different models. When we look at China, for example, which is the largest EV country in the market in the world, it's the largest market, and we saw the graph there earlier, the chart. In terms of percentage, maybe small, but in terms of sheer number, extremely large. And that chart actually, and that's exactly what I was going to tell you, that chart was more to do with four-wheelers, not so much two-wheelers. If you look at two-wheeler conversion, it's actually much larger than what you were seeing in that previous chart. It may not be the case for countries like Norway and Netherlands and Germany, etc., but certainly when it comes to Asian countries, the conversion of two-wheelers is much, much, much faster. That said, what they did in China was they yielded the stick and they had a carrot. So they banned IC engine vehicles from a number of cities, gave you subsidies to support the electrification, conversion to electrification, and provided the infrastructure. Now, clearly in India at this point of time, we are not going to yield the stick, and that's not something that we are even basing a business model on. But certainly there is a carrot in the terms of FAME 2, and then we've got the state carrots. We've got the states coming out with the production-led policies. We've got 21 of those, and then we've got 4 states which have also got demand-led incentive creation. So we've got Delhi and Mumbai, Maharashtra, Gujarat and Rajasthan, and numerous other states are going to come into this fray as well, where they're going to start supporting demand creation, which is going to be a very, very important factor. So battery prices, I was looking at, that's one of the factors which is a critical factor. We are currently at about $130 odd per kilowatt hour. This is expected to come down. There have been projections of $75 and $68, etc. But for our calculations, we don't go down to those numbers. Those are way too aggressive. So what's going to happen is that there is going to be a balance that comes out. So the pricing will come down to a certain extent, and then it's going to be the performance of the batteries which is going to start improving. So it's a Moore's curve that we are following. So either it's a price that keeps on dropping up to a certain extent, not in perpetuity, and then there is a performance improvement that continues to happen. Also, there is a demand and supply equation that you have to be considerate about. So as the demand is increasing, prices are coming down, but the demand is pulling the prices back up again. In fact, the price of lithium in the last 18 odd months has actually gone up, even though the battery chemistry is changing and lithium content in a battery has gone down substantially in the last couple of years. So what's happening is the chemistry is evolving into a different manner. Technology is evolving very, very rapidly. Right now, we may have lithium ion as being the primary source of batteries, but then we've got sodium ion, and we've got sodium sulfur, we've got zinc manganese, we've got solid state, and then we've got hydrogen fuel cell. Obviously, not all of these would be applicable to the smaller vehicles. Fuel cell will probably be applicable more to larger vehicles, something what Satwant is going to be talking about, etc. eventually. And then electric is going to be more about two-wheelers. It's going to be more about two-wheelers and smaller vehicles. In terms of B2B, that is going to play a very, very important role. It's a small market right now, but that is a market where enforcement can actually happen. So Delhi, for example, has come out with a policy which states that, conversion of B2B by 50% by 2023 and 100% by 2025. And similarly, they're talking about 40% of the consumer two-wheeler conversion by 2024. Similarly, Maharashtra has a policy in place which talks about conversion. So what we believe is going to happen is that is where there is going to be a nudge or a push by the governments, by the state governments, to start converting towards electric. And any responsible company will begin to convert that way. It's not, and so that is the challenge there is more to do with the aggregator model. So you've got an aggregator model where the rider actually comes with the vehicle and he goes and delivers the goods to you. So how does this financing happens? Right now, what's happening is that they are comparing this vehicle, the price of an IC, of an electric vehicle, as against to a price of a BS3 or a BS4 vehicle, which they buy at 15,000-20,000 rupees. So it's not an apple-to-apple comparison. That said, the running cost of this is dramatically lower. The TCO is extremely low as compared to the running cost of an IC engine vehicle. Just to give you a comparison, if you're running about 40 to 50 kilometers a day, on an IC vehicle, you're looking at 1 liter of fuel, which is about 106 odd rupees. And the electric two-wheeler, you're looking at about 1.5 units of power, which is about 12 odd rupees. So you've got that 94 rupee odd gap which exists there. When you look at it over a period of 3 years, you're looking at 94 odd thousand rupees, which is more than the cost of the vehicle. So you're actually getting your vehicle free, plus making more money on top of all of that. So what we anticipate from here on is the markets are going to evolve extremely rapidly. We are already on a hockey stick growth. Why the numbers are still small this year is because of demand constraint, because of supply constraint. It's not so much demand. At least in our case, we've possibly got multiple times demand more than what we are able to cater to that market, simply because of constraints with the batteries and chips and other supply chain issues, which would fall into place. So what we anticipate this market to evolve is to be a minimum of about 30 odd percent in the next 3 years, so by 2025 or so, and a minimum of about 50 odd percent by 2027 or so. Now, this is a base criteria, and this number can actually evolve much faster to a much greater number, provided certain factors fall into place. Now, some of them are things like, for example, financing of vehicles. So financing is still extremely poor when it comes to electric vehicles. It's still just about 10 odd percent. If it were to convert to 50%, there's a huge amount of conversion that happens. We are talking about priority lending when it comes to electric mobility. We are talking about the TCO when it comes to the B2B and B2C segments. We are talking about the various PLIs which are in place. So there is one for the ACC batteries, which was 18,000 odd crores. There's one for manufacturing, which is 11,000 crores. And there's a new one which is coming in, which is a 77,000 crore policy. And then, of course, part of CSR inclusions. Once, if EVs form a part of CSR and there's tax benefits that one can derive, then there will be a further push. EV-friendly zones and cities. while we may not yield the stick, but we could have zones in cities which are targeted at EV friendly. Reskilling of workforce is going to be a very critical factor. So, we've got a very large workforce here, which is over the last 4 decades been trained on IC engine. The skill set required for electric is slightly different because there's electronics and there's electrical components that come into play. We as a company have already trained about 7,000 of these roadside mechanics. And the idea is to train about 25,000 of them over the next 18 odd months. Charging infrastructure, that's going to be a very important factor. When you look at two-wheelers, you will be charging the vehicles or any other forms of vehicle, consumer vehicles. You will be charging the vehicles at night and only topping up during the day. So one, it helps in playing a very good balancing effect on the grid because the power of the grid, the requirement from the grid actually drops at night. And that is where electric comes in and actually helps in balancing out the grid. The second factor is that you need to have night charging close to places where you're parking your vehicle. In the absence of that, what we've done is we've made our batteries portable. So across the entire product range, you can actually take out the battery, take it into your home. It's about 9.5 kilos, plug it into a wall outlet, charge it, plug it back into the vehicle, and off you go. And you could decide between 1 or 2 or 3 batteries, giving you anything from 80 kilometers to about 210 odd kilometers. Now, there are questions which are going to come up in terms of energy security for us, in terms of, mineral, how are we securing ourselves from a perspective of lithium and cobalt and manganese, etc., where India, we've not explored the mining so far. So in 2017, there was a government PSU which was set up, which was called KABIL, which is Kanji Videsh India Limited, which is a consortium of 3 PSUs, basically to go and try and get energy security for India in terms of the raw materials. So very quickly, I think I've answered more than what you had asked, but I just wanted to give an overview. More than happy to take on any further questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I know you are in a great hurry. So what I would like to do is if I can open up the floor for questions that you can answer before you leave. So let's take questions from Mr. Munjal. Yes, there. So let's collect 3 questions first and then the next. Yeah. My God. So if you can introduce yourself and ask a question.
I'm Shushila Nair, independent journalist from Bangalore. I have 2 questions. One is a lack of charging points in the city. You don't find them everywhere. And secondly, in apartment complex, the residents who have these electrical vehicles are not allowed to charge in the common area. So they have to, the wire will dangle from their house and it will fall in the basement and they have to charge. 2 difficulties which we found.
Right. Here, so we'll take 3 questions and then.
Hello, myself Sampath from Nasik. There is one policy for local self-government as well municipal corporations that they should avail charging points in city. And Nasik Municipal Corporation had already taken that decision. Will it give more opportunities for electric vehicles selling?
Right. You had.
Hello, myself Chaitrali Chandorkar. I work for Maharashtra Times in Pune. Actually, both of them, they have covered my point. Just to make it short, is there any cooperation from local government or administration for increasing number of charging stations and as well as near to petrol pump?
So as you can see, Mr. Munjal, questions are related to what we call the charging anxiety. Everyone wants to know, I'm willing to buy, but how am I going to charge it? And at the same time, we feel that two-wheelers actually are easier to charge. So that's why it will be great if you can demystify this whole idea for us.
Certainly. All very valid points. I was hoping that somebody would ask me about the environment and something else, but since we've covered infrastructure, let me address those. So very valid points. And so what we've done is, in the absence of charging infrastructure, we made a batteries portable, which you can take into your home. So in fact, all of you sitting there in that auditorium, you could have actually bought your batteries there. And if you have a charging point on the sides of the room, plugged in the batteries there, charge it here, go, but when you step out, when plug it back into the vehicle, and off you go again. That's how easy it is. So there's no problem. While that's the case, there is range anxiety issues. So what we started doing a couple of years back is installing a charging infrastructure, not so much in petrol pumps and everything, but more in dense markets where you would generally go. So anywhere you would go to a grocery store, etc., you would put a Hero Electric charging station there. So even on our website, for example, you can find us by the charging stations or the service stations or the dealers. The whole concept behind that was that there should be no range anxiety issues that a customer faces. We installed about 2,000 of them. While doing that, we've already partnered with numerous companies, Massive and Charger, where they're installing about 25,000 of the stations across the country for us. That said, a large part of the customer base, they charge their vehicles at night at home, even whether it's taking out the battery or plugging into the wall outlet. So they're not really using it in the day so much. But what we find is, in areas where we've got the charging infrastructure installed and where the customer knows it, our sales go up about 3x in those zones, because people feel confident or comfortable that there is a charging port should I come to a standstill. They don't generally need to use it because the vehicles have a range of anything from about 80 kilometers to 210 kilometers, which is more than adequate even for the large metros to cover. So it's something which is coming in. Charging infrastructure will come. It is going to take a little bit of time. There are a number of policies in place to say that any new building coming in should have adequate charging infrastructure. That said, what happens to the older ones? These are challenges which are there, and these are limitations why people feel range anxiety issues, etc. But once they bought a vehicle and when we ask them the same question 6 months down, they don't have any of these range anxiety issues because they've never even used the charging infrastructure outside. They just charge it at home and they're able to run with it. We are not great believers at this point of time on installing them in petrol stations, etc. Because the challenge with that is, even if it's a day charge, even if you plug in your vehicle to charge there, where do you go after that? So what happens is, if you go into a market and a petrol station may not necessarily be next to this thing, and the minute you've got 100 vehicles charging there in a petrol station, you've got crowding happening in a space which is a kind of a volatile space from an environmental standpoint. So charging infrastructure will come in place. It's already happening. There is a lot of push towards it, both from the private sector and from the governments in various cities where they're installing it.
Anyone else? Yes.
I'm from Chhattisgarh. I have been riding your motorcycle for 20 long years. So I hope I'll get a battery operated one. My question is there any assessment what would happen to the mountain of used and expired batteries at the end of its life? I mean, that would be another environmental problem if these batteries are not meant to go on forever. So is there any assessment on that?
Yes. Right.
I'm glad you asked.
2, 3. We'll take 3 more questions and then you can answer.
Hi, my name is Avli and I'm a researcher. And since you have already pointed towards the environmental impacts, I would just take this opportunity to add to the question that Sunil sir just asked. Thinking about the whole life cycle assessment approach when it comes to even EV, we can have the similar problem that we have with coal. As lithium, we start extracting lithium to the amount that it's been happening with coal. So do you think like those sort of extraction, those impacts are being studied enough so to expand it to that level? Thank you.
The 2 hands at the back, 3 hands, yeah, here, and then 2.
I'm Sudha here from Times of India, Cochin. My question is at the user end, though I'm a very green-friendly person. One apprehension about these electric vehicles is, can it actually get the mileage to maneuver along, landscapes which are steep. Like I come from Kerala, so most of our roadways are winding and up and down and all that. Will the pickup, that is one apprehension which actually has been putting people, doubtful, where halfway down up the hill your vehicle goes off. and that's very, very simple level. I suppose you could answer that.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, one here, and then very quickly, because
my name is Nivedita. I'm from IANS. Question for Mr. Munjal. It's a very simple question about Jugaad, and what kind of R&D would be possible if existing two-wheelers, Hero Honda motors, need to be converted into EVs, and is there a possibility?
and two more, but that's it. So Munjal, you collect all the questions and then answer them all together.
I'm noting them down.
Yeah, sir, I am Ramesh from the Hindu. Sir, the main problem that is being faced in smaller towns, so tier 2 and tier 3 cities, is the maintenance infrastructure. There are many buyers, but the return from garage is taking some 7 to 8 days, a minimum of 7 to 8 days. If your vehicle goes for maintenance, may not be your hero vehicles, but I'm speaking on a general electric vehicle, electric two-wheeler platform. If you see, there are at least in my town there are 8 or 9 brands available, and on an average, any brand, if it goes to the garage, it comes back after a week or 10 days. So, how are you seeing the scenario?
The last question there. Yes.
Hi, I'm Navya from Union Express, Chennai. My question is just adding to that charging issue, the lack of universal charging points, because already the infrastructure is low and every other vehicle has a different charging port. So it reduces the EV adoption rate. What about that and the conversion as well?
Yes, Mr. Munjal.
All right. So I think I've got a whole bunch of diverse questions. I'm just going to take them one by one and try and answer all of them. And do let me know if there's anything that I missed out. So the first one, Sunil, you asked me about was expired batteries and what's going to happen. So what's going to actually happen is that batteries are not just going to be dumped out like this. These are very expensive batteries involving very, very expensive raw material that goes in terms of, the lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt, etc. So what happens is once it's done with us, let's say, 4 or 5 or 6 years from a vehicle, it will be much larger, a lot longer when it comes to larger vehicles, like buses, etc. But for two-wheelers, there is more strain on the battery. So let's say about 5 years hence, we give a 3-year warranty, but 5 years hence, the battery is done with a two-wheeler because the energy level has begun to taper down. Now, what would happen here is those batteries would go in for refurbishment, not for recycling. Now, what I mean by that is we've got UPSs and inverters at home which use lead acid and flooded batteries right now. So these batteries would go into stationary applications where they would be used for storing energy where there's not much load on the batteries. Automotive provides there's a lot of load that automotive has. And then after that, when they're done there, which is about probably another 5 to 7 years, they would go into recycling. There are a number of recycling companies, which I've been informed, have already come up in India where they're going to extract all the metals from there and reconstruct a new battery, which will go into another application, which is possibly either stationary or mobility of a different kind, but not necessarily in the prime this thing. So these batteries are not getting dumped into landfills by any means at all. There's absolutely none of that happening with lithium ion. I hope that answers your question, Sunil. Avleen, you've asked me about the life cycle approach and what happens to the environmental impact and the lithium extraction, etc. See, this is mining, lithium mining, as we have other mining, whether it is coal or it's any other minerals or we have iron ore or anything else that we mine. There is mining involved. Now, that said, environmental impact, when you look at it from a holistic approach and when you look at it from a very, very, very macro view, there could be an impact from the mining perspective, but we've got oil excavation also, which is happening. So we've got oil extraction, which happens, and here you've got mining. But when you look at it from a slightly more micro perspective, and when you look at it from an urban perspective, we have a huge challenge on our hands. Cities like Delhi, NCR, we are smogged in. I mean, right now it's better because the smog's gone away, but till about 15, 20 days back, our AQI levels were absolutely through the roof. That's no way to live. So the problem actually is an urban problem. There is one about mining, there's one about emissions. You didn't ask me about the emissions, but let me address that part also. So mining is not so bad. It's there in the rural district. It's not something which impacts the urban problem. And as we are going along, as the lithium content is coming down, the content of and the batteries are going to change. So they're going to go into sodium and then eventually go into hydrogen fuel cell, etc. But we have to transition from one technology to another. We are going to go from one to another. That's how the transition is going to happen. The second factor about the environmental concern is about the emissions that happen in a city level, where two-wheelers or any other forms of IC engine vehicles are emitting pollution. 2.5 kgs is emitted per liter of fuel burned. Now, whether it's a two-wheeler or it's a four-wheeler, it doesn't matter. That's the kind of emission that happens. It is much easier. Now, if you were to ask me, if it's much easier to control that pollution and have that at a central plant level, which is in a rural environment, and where you can have enough scrubbing there, rather than to have it at the individual level. So the challenge is in the urban, but here what you're doing is shifting it from there, scrubbing the air there, so you're able to get out much cleaner air. So that is from an environmental standpoint. So now you've asked me about the mileage and what happens with steep landscapes, etc. So this used to be the case where you had the lower speed vehicles with lead acid batteries and a 250 watt motor. The market is now a city speed market, which is a much larger motor. The torque is much better. The top speed may not be the same as IC, but the torque that you get in a city is absolutely fantastic. So I was using these vehicles in Goa and up and down the inclines and without a problem. And one of our more popular cities where we've got a very large part of vehicles being sold is actually Srinagar. So we've got a number of dealers in Srinagar who are selling these to people who are using them to go up the mountains as well without a problem. In fact, in some of the cases, I've been told the guy takes a friend along for a ride and without a problem. Of course, the more power you put in the vehicle, the better torque and the better performance you will get, but then that means a better battery, a higher speed, larger battery as well, which increases the cost. So in a lot of cases, it's not the speed which is a concern people are concerned about. They are talking about the torque, which is getting off the traffic signal quickly and onto a flyover without a problem, without losing any power. And these vehicles that you have right now are all addressing that. There is no problem with that. There was a question about Jugaad and R&D and conversion of IC to electric. See, while that is doable, and there are some companies who are doing it, we don't believe that you're going to be able to do it on a very large scale, not at an industrial scale. That's more of we find these even tractors where they've got something like a lawnmower, using it in parts of the country, when you go to UP and MP and certain other parts. You find all kinds of contraptions of vehicles being used. So for that, a few vehicles here and there is possible, but the minute you have to get it into billions of vehicles, it's going to be hugely challenging to do that, because an electric vehicle is designed, one, there is light weighting of the vehicle that happens to be able to take the batteries and to make it more efficient. You don't need that kind of load on ICE as you do have on an IC engine vehicle. So there's light weighting. The compartments are built in a way that they take the batteries and the motors and everything to derive the maximum efficiency out of that. Sure, you can convert any vehicle to electric, but you will not get the same level of efficiencies. And you're not going to save much on the cost in any case, So our most popular vehicle, for example, is 65,000 rupees, gives you a speed of 42 kilometers with fantastic torque and gives you a range of 130 kilometers. Now that is more than adequate for most people on a day-to-day basis. And the last part, and then there was a question which Ramesh asked me, was tiered maintenance and infrastructure. This is unfortunately a little bit of a challenge which exists with a lot of companies, because they are not geared up to handle. So a lot of companies think about electric vehicles as no service. I was told there are over 150 odd companies in this space right now in the two-wheeler segment. Now, most of them have zero background in electric vehicles. They have zero background in automotive. They have zero supply chain. They're buying the parts from somewhere, assembling it and sending it off into the market. And unfortunately, that gives a very, very wrong and a negative impression of this market. So what happens there is that they don't have enough spares. Why the vehicles in the dealership is not because of any issue with the vehicle itself, but it's because of lack of spares availability. What we've been doing is we've got 750 odd dealers. Every dealer is a service center. And then beyond that, we've trained 7,000 of these roadside mechanics where the dealers supply them spares. We've, in fact, in the number of years back when there was a financial crisis that happened and the market was crumbling in 2012, we were actually even servicing competition vehicles. We were getting spares for competition vehicles just to make sure that the market stays afloat. So we are extremely conscious of that fact that, this is a vehicle. It is not a no service vehicle, it is a low service vehicle. And even this will have breakdowns, you will have challenges, you will have accidents, and you need to be able to fix that very quickly. You can't have off the road vehicle for a week or even for 2 days. That's revenue gone for the guy. That's a huge nuisance value to the guy. So unfortunately, that is the case. As we go along, as the market expands, a lot of these companies, there will be consolidation that happens. A lot of these companies will not be able to survive if they don't provide the right service to the customer at the right time. So that's certainly something that's going to go away. And Navya, you asked about the charging infrastructure and universal charging. So our charging is actually a plug point. It is a 15 amp plug which you can plug into any wall outlet anywhere in the country. There is no special connectors. We've been very cautious of the fact that we don't want to have special connectors and recreate a charging infrastructure. You've already got the 5 and 15 amp. You can plug into a 5 amp also, but it'll be a trickle charge, very slow. Better to plug into a 15 amp. You plug into a 15 amp, and that's where you get 4 hours of full 0 to 100 charge. And for high-speed charging in the day, there would be charging stations which are there, which are again on universal ports. So there's no challenge on that. That challenge exists more on the cars and the larger vehicles because of the kind of power that you require there. But even there is Bharat 1 norms which have come into play where the connectors have now been standardized. So these are some issues which have been there in the past, no longer there, and certainly not going to be there in the future.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Munjal. I know you're in a great hurry, but this is wonderful, very insightful. And but before you go, just want to share with you that there's a huge expectation from our side, and we really want to see two-wheeler as a big disruptor. And so that by 2030, it is this segment should be at least 60 to 70% electrified, what Niti Aayog is saying. But as you also realize, and we realize, that there are many gaps in the policy approach today. There is no long-term policy visibility at this moment beyond FAME that gets over in 2024. And therefore, I hope that the industry and the government will work out those details together. But we certainly need to see firm milestones and very steady and confident transition in the market. And I'm sure you will do this. So thank you so much, Mr. Bunjal. It's great having you with us. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Just one last point before I log off. When we're talking about 60 to 70% in 2030, this number is actually going to come in much faster. So the 60 to 70 is going to come in a much faster pace than 2030, and I'm confident of that. So
that's very encouraging.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to log off. Satwant, good to see you again, and all the very best.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Bunjal. Truly appreciate. So now we move on to the next segment. And Mr. Sarwan Singh, and I just saw your message getting flashed that you also have just about another 15 to 20 minutes with us. So, but this segment that you represent is very critical. And we are all very conscious of the fact that when India designed its e-mobility program, especially the FAME program, this whole emphasis on combining public transport with electric mobility. And that's what we always see as a win-win strategy, because the global, the Western world is more focused on electrification of the cars, the personal cars. And when they do the number counting in terms of global electrification, they are counting cars, but we are counting buses in India. And I think that is really a powerful change we are looking forward to. But at the same time, looking at the experience so far with the FAME, the experience with the FAME incentive, and which is giving so much of incentive to at least bring 7,000 buses on the ground. And we have not been able to meet that target within the stipulated time. And now the deadline has been extended till 2024. And with a new model of demand aggregation, which CSL is helping the OEMs and the state governments to implement. Now, when we're looking at that, and also keeping in mind that what kind of target India has in terms of scaling up bus transport. I mean, if I just talk about bus transport, which is the prime mover, India requires at least 150,000 buses at this moment. And you know that last union budget has also sanctioned about 20,000 crore for 18,000 buses. And we are hoping that the government will target at least some part of that with electric buses. And at the same time, when we are looking at the state level policies, it is interesting to see the Delhi EV policy talking about 50% of its bus fleet to be EV buses. And the other Maharashtra and other governments are also, they are kind of beginning to fix their target as well. But that has raised a lot of questions. One, that where is the capability in terms of achieving that scale in the market? And right now, the OEM's response, their ability to respond to that market, and we are not very sure and clear about that how that scaling up is going to happen at the production level. And another experience that we have, because some cities have already started to operate the buses, and there are numbers today. In Kolkata, we have got 80 buses. There is Navi Mumbai talking about another 200 buses. Ahmedabad got a very large fleet of buses. And when we talk to the state transport corporations, they say that when they look at the operational cost, actually Ahmedabad said that that the e-buses are 60% cheaper to operate, but it is the upfront capital cost which is the problem. Now, if it really works for everyone, but where are the barriers today? And in terms of the performance of the buses, and in terms of scaling up the market and production capability. So that was our question for you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. And that's a very good question that sets me up nicely for my presentation. I was a former consultant in my previous life, so I will use some slides to present. I'm not as eloquent as Naveen was. So let me share my screen and I'll use that to answer your questions. And I'll also share a little video to you. So very quick first introduction to me. Can I just check everybody can see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Perfect. Excellent. So quick introduction to me. I'm Sarwan Singh. I'm CEO of OM Mobility and also Chief Planning Officer of Switch. OM is a subsidiary of Switch. OM is the company that I manage as CEO. And this company uses innovative business models to put buses on the road, just like you said. How do you bridge that gap between high capex requirement for electric buses? Switch is a subsidiary of Ashok Leyland. It's born electric, so we only do 100% electric vehicles. Personally, I've been driving an electric car for 6 years, so I'm a very good convert. And earlier, Naveen and I were both together at COP26 presenting our companies respectively. So that was also very helpful. So let me answer that question with a few slides. Firstly, the biggest problem we have in India is we have some of the most polluting cities in the world. 8 of the top 10 most polluted cities are in India. Secondly, and it's great to see Amazon here today, organizations like Amazon are very keen on having sustainable transport solutions on the road. And so are India's state transport undertaking. It's just been an amazing revelation to see the amount of interest of putting commercial electric mobility solutions. If you look at the global market, it is going to grow by 5x. When you look at e-bus and LCVs, we see India growing almost 40x. So huge potential of growth in India. Earlier in your presentation, you showed that India and the target set by Niti Aayog of 40%. Actually, we see that it should or could be even higher than that. Just to give you a global perspective, the global bus market is about 270 to 80,000 units pre-COVID. 130,000 of that comes from China. 60% plus buses in China were electric. This is 2019, 2020. India comparatively has only 40,000 buses, or roughly 36,000 sold. Nowhere India's infrastructure is as good as China. So the first thing I think is India's bus industry will grow faster as India's urbanization rates grow. Secondly, I see no reason why India cannot be 60 to 80% electric, new vehicle bought by 2030. If you look at other places, I talk about London. The Transport for London has declared that by 2035, their fleet will be completely zero emission. The buses in UK last 15 years, rewind it, and they've stopped buying electric already. So many countries in the Western world, many cities in the Western world, for intra-city transport will be 100% electric by 2030. So I think if you ask me, India's goals are not that ambitious. We should be pushing even more. Every bus bought should be zero emission, in my opinion. Now, if you look at the Indian bus industry and the customer structure, this slide shows you that about 40% of the buses bought in India are transit. So out of those 40,000 buses, roughly about 10,000 buses are transit or STUs. But there is that extra 30,000 which is not. Now, the state subsidy on FAME is only for public transport, which I think is a bit of a shame. The government should really start also putting subsidy for buses bought in airports, for school buses, other transport. As you can see here on the yellow, India has a 20% school bus market, and there is a huge also employee transport market in India. And that market could also be electric. And we see different models. The FAME subsidy works on a GCC contract. So it's a managed services contract. It's typically a pay-per-mile contract. But we are developing what we call battery as a service model, where we will sell the vehicle at a slight premium to a diesel vehicle for a school bus application, and then lease the battery for 12 years. Now, when you buy a car or if you buy a diesel bus, you don't buy it with a fuel tank. So that's the concept, that that part of your running cost will be associated with the battery price. So that's, I think, just a bit of an overview of the Indian bus market. If you look at light commercial vehicles, the light commercial vehicle market is growing, but again, nowhere near the numbers that China has. Again, we see about 40% of this market could be electric by 2030. Again, if there's a push, I think this could even be higher. And if Indian conglomerates like Amazon make a policy that they'll only buy zero emission, this could even go much higher in the future. So when we look at what we are doing, now there are two ways to look at it. You could say, in my company Switch, my parent company, we look at the total number of buses sold. In my company OHM, we look at total number of kilometers driven. So, we did an assessment and we said, if we look at the numbers that I shared and a percentage of those are electric, roughly about 160 billion kilometers are driven in India. About 43 billion of that can be electric. And we put ourselves a target that we will address 5 billion kilometers of that. So in other words, we are not selling buses, we are selling electric kilometers. And that for us means that we need to bridge that gap that you talked about. The cost of a bus today, diesel bus, electric bus, can be 2 to 3 times. The subsidy is very attractive, and I have to compliment the Indian Niti Aayog and the Department of Heavy Industries. This is a very ambitious program. The new CSL tender is quite aggressive in terms of number of units of buses that they're buying, which could be a mega tender in itself. But still, how do you bridge that gap that you have to put a large amount of capex in terms of charging infrastructure as well as buy those buses? So that's where we come in with an OPEX model. And the other important thing for somebody like OHM is, if we sell those 5 billion kilometers by 2030, we save about 1.2 million tons of CO2. That's roughly about 1 million gallons of diesel burned every year. So the green credentials are also very important as part of this. So what we are doing in OHM is to meet this mission of making commercial mobility affordable. We are moving from what we call a capex-based model to an OPEX-based model. We believe we can disrupt the industry by providing zero emission mobility, but also generating revenue through the vehicle life cycle and creating value through the vehicle life cycle. Now, just to give you an idea, most of the Indian STUs are not financially in a good position. And I think what DHI and Niti Aayog has done is they've done what we did with going from 2G to 4G. By pushing the STUs to use private operators like us, we improve the efficiency of the operations. We roughly have 3.5 employees per bus, whereas some STUs will have 6 to 9 employees per bus. So you can see the efficiency improvement we do. Now, what we also do is we're not just selling buses. We believe our business model is different. So it's about OPEX based. It's about, so we are providing mobility. We are providing financing and leasing. We are providing a connected digital solution. And most importantly, we bundle it with the full energy services as part of our offering. So these are the ways how we build our business. So it's about very customized business models. It's about competing on TCO. You made a very good point that Ahmedabad says that the TCO operations of an electric bus is cheaper. Absolutely spot on. We run about 40 buses in Ahmedabad. We've been running them for over 2 years. We've done 6 million kilometers. They are much cheaper to run than diesel. And over a 10-year life cycle, despite the high capex cost, the buses are cheaper to run on an OPEX basis, not to mention the green credentials they bring. And I'd also mention, I'll talk about this digital platform we have. So this is a picture from our Ahmedabad operations. You can see the buses on the right-hand side. You can see the chargers. And what we also do is we do route and schedule planning using our software. And I'll show you a quick demo of our software. And we have completely digital operational planning and monitoring. Talking about Ahmedabad, I'll give you an example. There's a particular bridge in Ahmedabad, which is downhill. Our buses, when it came to that bridge, were speeding more than 50. And the drivers tried to slow down. And we said, why depend on the driver? And we were getting some tickets for it. We actually did a software over the air update and reduced the speed when the bus comes to that point to 45. So, and we do a lot of driver training management through using the software. So we're making our buses safer. And of course, we're also ensuring that they are completely compliant using digital means. So this is the offering that we provide. This is another interesting part. We are going to put 300 buses in Bangalore. We plan to be the first OEM in India, which will put a 15 megawatt. That is the capacity of the buses that we'll need. We'll put a 15 megawatt solar plant to manage it. So it will be completely carbon neutral operations. So it is also our intention to ensure that the batteries have a second life and they can be used for load balancing. And we do everything in terms of helping our customers plan from end to end. So we take ensure that we take full responsibility of providing a complete carbon neutral operations. Let me show you a quick video that'll tell you a little bit about how digitally we manage our operations.
We live in a world of hyper-connectivity. Data and technology is changing the way we see and interact with the world around us. Our vehicles communicate with their surroundings to make the world a safer place to live. And our journeys are not measured by distances, but by immersive digital experiences. As we move into the next generation of commercial mobility, with our rich experience in pioneering cutting-edge connected mobility solutions, we are already redefining the future for a greener planet, since we are digital innovators. Using prognostics, we put our customers ahead in time to manage their fleets efficiently. We understand driving patterns and empower our drivers with actionable real-time alerts. Our integrated digital suite is customized for last-mile applications and ensures that the end-to-end efficiencies of every delivery are maximized. We optimize our energy packs through advanced analytical simulations to seamlessly optimize charging processes. Our groundbreaking over-the-air technology helps us remotely diagnose vehicles and perform software upgrades for sustained peak performance. Through our scalable platforms, we capture 2 terabytes of data per day and deliver best-in-class total cost of ownership with our digital twin models powered by AI-enabled analytics. Our world of digital solutions lay the foundation as we embark with confidence on our journey of democratizing zero carbon mobility and enriching lives with green energy. Future is here with Switch.
Thank you. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
I'm a little bit
Thank
short
you.
of time.
No, so that's very, very interesting. And what you have shown and the way you have explained it, it's very clear that with electric buses, we are actually getting into a new generation of business model for buses in India, where we are moving away from the traditional model of where STUs, they buy buses, they operate, they maintain, they run, they do everything. But now as FAME scheme also requires that it should be on a gross cost contract basis, but where someone else is going to operate the buses. And it can be even OEM, it can be the service provider of the OEM. So it's a completely a new, it's a game changer from that perspective. And that's something that we really want to understand, because even Ashok Leyland, for which you are providing the mobility service, they had also gone in for this kind of a model. And additionally, they had also tried out battery swapping for buses. And even though we know battery swapping is going to be more common in smaller vehicles, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and this time the union budget has been very categorical about promoting battery swapping. But overall, from looking at it from the business model perspective, that what OEMs need to do today, in addition to just producing the buses, that also run the buses. So what does that mean for the industry? But before you answer my question, I would like to open up the floor for some more questions to come your way.
Thank you.
Yes. So if you collect your questions, Mr. Singh, and then you can answer all of them together.
Sure.
Jayant Basu from Telegraph. I just narrate a very small experience. While covering the COP26, I went to a friend's house, friend's place, and he moved me around with a beautiful car, electric vehicle operated car. And when I asked him, he said, the price is a bit more than the market, but we get significant subsidy from the local government. My point is, and he said that even in UK, unless you give the subsidy, the market is not opening up. So my question is, yes, market will sometime down the line will catch up, but there's this marriage between till when and how much subsidy will be given. So what's the equation is and what do you feel about it?
Right. Anyone else? Yes.
Sir, I'm Harsha from Mangalore. I work for Deccan Herald. So you said 300 buses will be introduced in Bangalore. On January 26th, about 50 electric buses were introduced, and only 10% of them are being operational because due to lack of charging stations. So this is the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
So then at the back. Okay.
Myself, Chaitrali Chandorkar. I work from Maharashtra Times. I'm from Pune. First, I want to give you feedback that I have traveled in Pune by electric bus. So it's an interesting experience. Second point I want to ask, these buses are comfortable or capable in hill region, like we have Western Ghats in our area. So Ghat area, is it capable?
Yeah, I think I'll just take 3 if you don't mind.
Just one more last question and then you answer the question.
Mr. Singh, I am Arnav from Down to Earth magazine. My question was the presentation that Mr. Munjal gave before this. He talked about the economics of electric scooter or electric motorcycle. So he said that you spend about 12 rupees per kilometer, per 40 kilometers. Whereas if you're using a IC-based scooter or motorcycle, right, you're spending 100 rupees. Now, because we are also pushing two-wheelers, do you see a clash? Because if you want to make public transport sustainable, you need to price the bus rides lower than your personal vehicles, right? So do you think that there's some kind of a dichotomy in that?
Yeah, No, thank you. Very good questions. I think I've taken a note. I'll answer them quickly, all of them. So do you need market subsidy? I think that was the first question. The answer is initially yes. And that's because we need scale. We need scale to drive the price of batteries and components down. The good news is the battery prices roughly are around 150 kilowatt per hour for a pack today, and they can all come down below 100. So the moment they are around $70 to $80, the IC engine is really in bit of a trouble. So I think subsidies help initially, but I think the industry post 23, 24 will be able to sustain on its own without subsidy because of the reduction in prices. I think the second question was around Bangalore and lack of charging. Those 50 buses are not ours. Our buses will go in later this year. We are putting our own charging infrastructure in 7 places in Bangalore. So 4 depots and 3 opportunity chargers. So the good news with commercial mobility is it's depot-based charging. We don't need to charge the vehicles in public roads because they follow a very predetermined route. And we charge the vehicles in the morning, and most of the vehicles in Ahmedabad run on a 1-day charge, but some of the vehicles get an opportunity charging in the afternoon. So we would put, you saw the video I showed, based on that video with the analysis we do, we would put 200, 250, 300 kilometer battery based on the requirement of the bus every day. So that charging anxiety is covered with our business model. Then I think there's a very interesting question around, can these buses run in the ghats? The answer is yes. Again, you do take more energy when you're going uphill the bus, but the good news is when the bus is coming down the hill, we regenerate that energy. So absolutely not an issue of running these buses. I think the more issue is running them in very cold places or very hot places. Terrain doesn't make a huge difference, if anything. And the last question was around the economics. You mentioned the example from Naveen. The electric buses, the TCO, like I mentioned, is much more competitive than diesel. As of now, without subsidy, with subsidy, it's very competitive. In the private sector, without subsidy, it's a little bit challenging at the moment. But that we are expecting, again, it's that chicken and egg situation. The more buses orders we have, the more we can negotiate better pricing on the batteries and more lower the cost can be. So if you task me on a unit economics, they're very competitive on running cost if needed. And again, if you put solar panel and, for example, if we generate the energy through solar means, there is 1 rupee per unit benefit anyways. So that's quick questions from me. I'm sorry, I need to shoot. I'm being a bit rude, but
Yes,
if any questions, just send me a LinkedIn question.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Singh. So the only message, I mean, this is a great insight that we've got from you. And the only message that we would like to also share with you is the fact that now, after a few years of e-bus operations in our different cities, perhaps time has come for us to understand what is the ground-based feedback on the technology. So the incentives and subsidies will certainly help to bring price parity. But what we are noticing now that the buses are not being able to maintain the range that is required, and also that how quickly the batteries are deteriorating. And so it's perhaps time has come that we link the incentive and subsidy more explicitly with some of these clear performance linked indicators so that we can really see big change in the market, because at the end of the day, e-buses are going to provide the mobility that is required for decarbonization. So I think that's where you will be playing a big role, because you are providing that service and you can really provide that very insightful feedback so that the next pathway that we are going to evolve on buses can be a lot more enriched. So thank you so much, Mr. Singh, and thanks a lot for being with us. So big hand to Mr. Singh.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
So now we move on to the speaker, but it's also the very interesting part of the conversation. Ms. Smriti Sharma, Head of Public Policy, Amazon. You're there, Ms. Sharma? Yes.
Yes, I am.
Welcome. Great meeting you. Ms. Sharma, so ever since COVID has hit us, that has really made us so much more conscious of e-retail. We have been doing that even earlier, but our dependence, our ecosystem, our entire world is now evolving around and revolving around e-retail now. And what we have understood that as this picks up in the future, especially in India, I mean, we were looking at some numbers that the number of kilometers that e-retail is going to do is going to run into trillions of kilometers, right? Now, adding trillion of kilometers to your overall freight mobility also means that even though it kind of reduces emissions from not doing physical shopping, but somewhere it also gets offset because of the sheer volume of the retail that is going to happen this way. So clearly there is a big agent of decarbonization as far as e-retail is concerned. And we know that Amazon, even at a global level, you are taking on new mandate, new targets, and you are committing yourself to electric mobility. But we wanted to understand from you Indian context of that change. And now, very recently, as you know, that when Delhi government gave you the target that we have to now move towards 100% electrification by 2025, right? Now it is somehow becoming a reality, even in our own market. So how do you perceive this? How Amazon and your peers are preparing for that change? What is needed? And what will be the model? Because one model, as we understand, is where you yourself are going to invest in the fleet, and that is easier thing to handle. But if you have to aggregate the fleet, then how do you control? So those are some curious questions that we have.
Thank you. Thank you so much. These are very, very important questions, exactly the kind of questions that, in fact, we are dealing with and thinking about on an everyday basis. I think the first very important part of the question is what exactly is the role of Amazon in this entire story? Because we're just a marketplace. And therefore, what exactly is our role in the electrification of fleet? Neither are we the buyers of fleet, nor are we the sellers of fleet. So what role can Amazon play? Not to say that Amazon cannot. In fact, it can. It realizes it can play actually a major role, and therefore it should, which is also the reason why we have committed just within India that by 2025, we are going to have a 10,000 strong EV fleet. And I'm pretty sure that we'll achieve that number. However, Amazon is primarily a marketplace, and I think that is important to understand that it is a place, it is a way of life where buyers and sellers are getting connected with each other. So we are providing that platform. But these buyers and sellers, they obviously use a lot of the infrastructure. The idea is to give them market access, and that market access can be provided via our own infrastructure or by their own infrastructure. Because I look after operations, I can divide it neatly into 3 legs, the transportation especially. And one leg would, of course, be the first mile, which is where we pick up the goods from the sellers and bring it to our warehouses. Then there is a middle mile where we are taking these goods from these warehouses to a sorting center where these packages are going to be put together, and finally they will be dispatched in the last mile to the consumer. So there are these 3 legs of transportation that currently happen. And the electrification of fleet that is happening largely is happening in the last mile, not so much in the first leg, not so much in the middle leg. So as far as the heavy vehicles are concerned, that part of electrification is not really happening where a substantive investment can be made and things can happen. So now our question is to ourselves, which is, what is the trade-off that we have to work with? Which is that the last mile is primarily the mile that is most consumer facing. That is where you get to see the drivers who come to you and deliver the things. And they really have emerged as the superheroes of this lockdown time, where they have brought you goods, where they've brought you, everything that you needed right at your doorstep. So this sector of e-commerce has also emerged as a sector which has provided employment in the most dim of times. And therefore, the trade-off is that if I mandate electrification of fleet, am I by any chance excluding people who are not going to be a part of this, or who find themselves unable to be a part of this? Because when I engage with a vendor, who is providing me these drivers, he's basically trying to, I'm providing my heft to influence his behavior. I'm telling as Amazon to my vendor, look, I'm going to engage with only those drivers who have an electric vehicle. If they don't have, then the government has told me not to engage with them. It's easy for me to do that. The problem is the trade-off is somebody who does not have an EV right now is falling out of the net, and then he does not get to participate in this employment opportunity. That for us is a big concern. So on one hand, there is a labor issue. On the other hand, there is a sustainability issue. The other challenge that we think about, because we are committed to sustainability, not just in terms of EVs, it's sustainability overall, right? It is the larger sustainability footprint that you create. It's not just what you're doing with your fleet. It's also how you are charging, what kind of charging infrastructure are you creating? What is that charging infrastructure itself plugging itself into, right? Now, if this charging infrastructure is being fueled by the normal diesel vehicle, the normal, non-renewable energy sources, then I think the entire purpose is defeated. Then we are only posturing and fooling ourselves. So let's be very clear about where is this coming from? Is the charging infrastructure going to offset the benefits that we are going to derive from, creating this electrified fleet? I think that's a question, again, we need to think of, and that is something we are very cognizant of. So for example, Amazon in a lot of its warehouses has the ability to create solar energy, right? And India, for that matter, can do a lot better on that front. And we have almost committed to, using solar energy on various platforms. However, there is a lot that government needs to do here also, because traditional electricity sources, the grid power that is being used currently is not from the renewable sources. And there is a lot of reluctance even now amongst state governments to allow for solar energy or renewable energy sources to be the primary source of energy. And that stops players like us to use it. That stops players like others to, create a more sustainable footprint. So let's not, close our eyes to that part of the equation where the charging infrastructure also needs to be fed by renewable sources of energy. Only then would we be really doing an honest exercise of this. The third part, and I think somebody who picked it up in the audience, I think that was a great question. What are you going to do with all these EVs that are going to come up and the e-waste that's going to be created? That is another question that we need to be cognizant of. And this is something that we think about, that, all this fleet, first of all, who is going to acquire it? Then what is going to happen to the second-hand market? Is there a second-hand market? Is it going to thrive? What would be the cost of it? Not in terms of money, but the opportunity cost, the kind of challenges it would make us come face to face with when it finally, reaches its end of life cycle. And then I think another question that we think about is the very fact that e-commerce was supposed to provide market access to the buyers and sellers both, right? So today I can order anything I want from anywhere, the remotest part of the country I can get. We have these artisans, we have these weavers who sit so far off from me, but are able to send me that piece of sari, a channa patna toy from Karnataka to Delhi, and I can avail it. That connectivity is not only for the seller, it's for me as a consumer also. Will EVs inhibit that to an extent? Because the charging infrastructure that is currently created is not very evenly distributed. The charging infrastructure right now, for example, I read, at least as per my knowledge, I understand that Delhi has charging infrastructure which is 12 times of Rajasthan. Right? So it's so unevenly distributed, probably more better deployed in urban areas. Are we cutting off a part of the country via, are we just excluding them and saying that, if you sort of mandate it, then are you going to be putting these people out of the entire market? So these are questions that we need to be thinking about. So I'll just sort of repeat what my concerns are. My biggest concern is with regards to the people who are behind these vehicles, right? Vehicles are not vehicles on their own. There is a person sitting behind them driving them. We have to think of that person who's driving that vehicle. What happens to his job? What happens to how he buys it? What happens to how he disposes it? Can he give it to another person and get some money out of it? These are real questions that people who buy vehicles deal with. Can I get rid of it in 2 years? Can I get a new vehicle for myself? Is there what is so I think we're still at the very nascent stage. So government, while I appreciate what they're doing and I understand where they're coming from, I think the incentives, which can both be positive and not to say negative, but let's say which can be sometimes more strict, I think they will have to strike a balance there and make sure that you do not turn the ship in a direction that it hits the iceberg, right? So it's good that the Titanic is taken off, but let's make sure that it lands. So I think I'm going to really worry about the people behind the vehicles, the upfront costs, as well as the maintenance costs, and also think about what kind of infrastructure exists, and accordingly sort of make my own plans with regard to what kind of mandates am I going to give the players in terms of electrification. Let's not do something that cannot be reversed in terms of making people drop out of this, because if people lose jobs, then I think that would be a worse outcome than this. And lastly, I just want to say that there is a lot of technology that's being worked upon, whether it is in terms of creating charging infrastructure, but also in terms of I think there is visibility that is required for these drivers who are mapping the last mile. So all this artificial intelligence that is available to us, the digital maps and the digitization that's been done, which will put me in some sort of, which will give me some sort of an assurance that if I've set out on a route, on a remote route, I know where the charging infrastructure is, where are the charging stations. I need to have visibility on those things also. So with that, I don't think there is a clean solution to this, but I would say that Amazon and companies like Amazon are ready to utilize their heft to balance out these situations. And we will go where the government will tell us to, and we will most gladly uptake these mandates. However, I think the questions that need to be thought of are to do with people and livelihoods, and also the life cycle of what we are getting into. Once we have sorted those, I think we are all set to go.
Great. Thank you so much. Right. So let's take the questions first, Ms. Sharma, and then we'll take the conversation forward. Any question? And while we wait for the questions to come, at this moment, because Indian government is not part of the policy to give subsidy for personal cars. As a result of that, the personal car industry, they are kind of sluggish and not innovating enough and putting out the models enough to have wider choices in the market. So whatever we have today, because there is an incentive only for commercial application of cars, so that's why we have very few models. Now, therefore, this limited availability of models, does that affect the operations and choice of vehicle, and whether that suits your e-commerce requirements? And the second is about the financing of this kind of vehicles and this sector, because already we know that the financial institutions, banks, they have not yet come up with adequate fiscal instruments, and so that So do you see those as a barrier? And that's something that needs to be done to be able to accelerate the change in the sector.
I think
before you answer my question, Smith, there is one hand I can see. So just take the question so that you can answer them quickly.
This is Sunil, a journalist from Chhattisgarh. I'm using this opportunity to ask you a question about your existing delivery setup. I can witness dozens of Amazon parcel carrying two-wheeler riders with a huge bag on their back, which is totally unsafe for a two-wheeler rider. It is so totally unsafe, and they are the worst coolies carrying so much of burden, which makes it very dangerous for them. So have you ever given it a thought?
Right. So Smriti, go ahead. So that was the last question. So you can answer
Thank you for that question. Thank you for that question. It gives me an opportunity to clarify, which is exactly why I'm thanking you for that. You see, there is an optimal level of package that is created for last mile deliveries. And there is a way to ensure that none of it is causing any kind of safety hazard or any kind of issues with regards to their physical well-being when these packages are designed. I understand that optically, when you look at it, it looks like as if the driver is carrying a huge bag and it is impossible to be carried. But rest be assured, there is the safety of the driver, and if maybe followed by safety of the goods is something which would be of paramount importance to Amazon and any other, for example, any other aggregator who would be, using these delivery personnel. There is no way that delivery personnel would agree to compromising their safety, and we would not be, ever happy to put anybody through that sort of risk, and we don't. So first of all, you need to just sort of trust that we can't be sending out so many hundreds and thousands of deliveries, putting so many people at risk. Number one. I'll come back to the question that you asked, ma'am, and that was more to do with, if, the passenger segment, which is not seeing a lot of innovation in terms of cars, is if that's a problem for us. I think the bigger challenge for us is, cars we do not really use so much for delivery purposes, but for our middle mile, there are, trucks that are required. There are these LMVs, which are light medium vehicles, which are required. And I think there was a little more innovation that would be far more welcome. But while that happens, we are also trying to reduce our dependence on road transport and trying to use the infrastructure that is available to us, say, for example, in terms of railways. And a lot of e-commerce companies have now started working closely with railways to utilize that network, which is far more sustainable and is also definitely better spread out. So I think the way, again, it comes back to the same point which I said, that sustainability is the larger goal and agenda. And let's not try to justify one leg of it. There are other ways of also simplifying and finding other solutions to make sure that the carbon emissions come down. I think the larger goal is to bring down the carbon emission. If that can be done, and I think we remain very committed to using public transport for a lot of our own deliveries. And I think that's going to be a huge game changer, which is why the gentleman before me from Switch Mobility, when he was talking about the buses and everything, I really think that is going to be a huge game changer, and that will make sure that we cut down on the carbon emissions that we are doing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nidhi, because, you know, when we had designed this session, this time we wanted to do it differently because most of the time we talk to the policymakers and others and constantly talking about how to design the policy better. But this time we thought it's important to have an industry dialogue that learn from the industry, the real practitioners, that what it means to deliver on electric mobility target, because all the policies are shaping now where this kind of participation of the industry becomes absolutely critical. So that's why it was so important for us to have this dialogue with you. And we are very happy that we could have this, because globally, as we are beginning to understand that because electric vehicle is a new animal in town, and there is very little understanding at the level of the consumer, producer, policymakers, that how do you really design enablers for accelerating the change? So it's interesting to see how globally, therefore, we are seeing alliances shaping up between OEMs, governments, even civil society. They're all coming together to understand how can we design and frame the pathway. So I think with this dialogue, and this gives us huge amount of confidence that if we can really build that kind of dialogue and take that forward, keeping in mind that at this moment, policies in India are very fuzzy. Even though we are talking a lot about it, but the policy milestones are not clear. And if the long-term policy visibility is not clear, then that does not bring certainty in the investments that are needed in the market. So that's why we hope that we will be able to create a pathway that is measurable, verifiable, and will deliver on decarbonization goal. So thank you so much, Smriti, for being with us. And it was really wonderful listening to you from your perspective and to get the insight. So thanks a lot. So big hand to Smriti, all of you. Thank you. I'm sure you all are absolutely tired now, want to have your tea. So let's break for tea. No summing up for this session. And we will now